Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Trek Talk live stream. So, today I'm going to be looking at the Corbomite maneuver. Let me bring this up. There it is. Well, cooperate with me. There we go. So, this was the first episode that was filmed after the second pilot where No Man Has Gone Before. However, although it was the second in production order, it was the 10th episode aired. The delay was mainly due to there being so many special effects shots in this episode, which delayed its completion. Now, as is often the case, I'll be reading from These Are the Voyages by Mark Cushman, providing some behind the scenes information about the episode, about the casting and the production of it. And I'll just go ahead and start there. So, this comes from a press release, an NBC press release that was issued on October 18th of 1966. Accused of trespassing in a foreign galaxy, the USS Enterprise engages in an eerie mid-space confrontation with the flagship of an alien civilization in the Corbomite Maneuver on the NBC television network colorcast of Star Trek, Thursday, November 10th. When it becomes obvious that the enemy vessel is vastly superior in size and weaponry, Captain James Kirk, played by William Shatner, vainly resorts to evasive tactics only to have his craft rendered powerless by his adversary, Captain Baylock, played by Clint Howard. A battle of wits ensues between the two spacecraft commanders when Kirk angrily defies a surrender ultimatum in a desperate ruse to gain time. Okay, so the penalty for trespassing, and this is Cushman writing here. The penalty for trespassing in this area of space is death, and the helpless Captain Kirk is only given 10 minutes to prepare his crew for execution. With those precious few minutes ticking away, tension on the bridge mounts, taking an especially high toll on Lieutenant Bailey, a young officer who Dr. McCoy feels Kirk promoted too quickly. This is not man against beast at first glance, as the face of Baylock's grotesque alter ego might have us believe. Kirk says it while addressing his crew over the intercom. Quote, "You know, the greatest danger facing us is ourselves, an irrational fear of the unknown. But there is no such thing as the unknown. There are only things temporarily hidden, temporarily not understood. In most cases, we have found that intelligence capable of a civilization is capable of understanding peaceful gestures. All decks stand by, Captain out." The cleverness of this script lies in the scope of its backstory. The space buoy the Enterprise first encounters, that cube in space, is the flypaper which lures us into this well constructed tale. Like the game of chess or poker played out by the two captains, each move in this story reveals a new layer enriched with surprise. And the surprises are wonderful. The Enterprise being confronted by the grandness of Baylock's mothership as it dwarfs the Earth vessel, meeting the real Baylock, a man who physically resembles a child, and then discovering this strange alien's true intent. A soon to be recurring theme of Star Trek, that mankind is worthwhile even though we humans are flawed, is already in place. And those flawed humans make for great conflict. Bailey's gradual breakdown is superbly played as he withdraws into shock and loses the ability to relate to his colleagues. Kirk is in the hot seat, all eyes on him, and one pair is flashing disapproval. McCoy enjoys the privilege of being the only one on board who can needle the captain. And then that teasing turns serious as the jock challenges Kirk about his judgment, his intent, and even his weight. When being ribbed about the pretty yeoman, Kirk admits that he already has a woman in his life, and her name is the Enterprise. Kirk only has love for her. The characters, fleshed out and three dimensional as the sector of space they intrude upon, carry the story. With so much going for it, Corbomite doesn't need fast pacing or a variety of sets. Like a tautly written stage play, our attention is held fast. Okay, so Jerry Soule provided the not as simple as it seemed premise. The 51-year-old was best known for and respected for his popular science fiction novels, such as Costigan's Needles and Mars Monopoly. He had already written for The Twilight Zone and Outer Limits, and with less artistic respect, some cheap monster films for the big screen. Soule's outline from March 1966 was called Danger Zone, with all respects to Kenny Loggins. It was rough, of course. Many of the characters of the series, as well as the technology of the Enterprise, were still on the drawing boards. Soule was paid for the outline and then rewrote it for free with a title change to the Corbomite Maneuver, now emphasizing the bluff Kirk plays to save his ship. Upon reading this draft, associates producer Robert Justman wrote to Roddenberry, "For the most part, I'm greatly pleased with Jerry Soule's revised outline. He has done everything that we discussed together last time we met and has tightened up the story considerably." In this version, or in the early versions of the script, the Enterprise breaks free of Balok's smaller ship. Then the seemingly unconscious alien commander, a normal sized humanoid in this version, is brought aboard and rushed to sickbay. This is the final test of Kirk's crew by Balok to see what they will do once he is helpless. This humanitarian their humanitarian goodwill impresses him and he accepts their friendship. This ending lacked the cleverness that was to come. A new draft outline was quickly written by Roddenberry, this one containing the spin at the end. Balok now described as an adult alien resembling a child. Jerry Soule approved of the change, later saying, quote, "They added the fellow at the end, which was like so many of my novels, where a little kid is behind the whole thing. That tickled Gene Roddenberry, and Justman was taken by the whole thing." Bailey still doesn't make the trip to Balok's ship at this point, and he is not the navigation officer. Instead, he started out at the communications station, which meant there was no Uhura. It was Gene Roddenberry's series of rewrites, beginning with the May 9th final draft, which brought much of the life and conflict into the Corbomite maneuver, as well as the character of Uhura. So, yeah, this was the episode that first brought Uhura onto the show. So, I'll talk about that for a minute. Again, this is from Cushman's book. Nichelle Nichols, 31, was a fairly new face in TV. On stage, Nichols was a dancer, and I think I got, where is that? Yeah, where we go. I got an image of her. So, on stage, Nichols was a dancer and singer and had appeared in Porgy and Bess. Joe Agosta was responsible for her television acting debut for the racially charged episode of The Lieutenant that ruffled NBC's feathers so badly and contributed to the cancellation of the series. He recalled, "I had seen Nichelle and a fellow named Don Marshall do a scene in an acting class that I was in. So I brought them in for an audition. They didn't have SAG cards, they had never done film or TV, but they soon would get them because we hired them on the spot for the lead in that episode." Roddenberry and DaGosta were both impressed by Nicole's performance on The Lieutenant. However, DaGosta did not know that Roddenberry and Nichols had an affair. He merely recalled that her as cooperative, reliable, and talented. To Roddenberry's credit, he was determined not to allow his relationship with Nichols to influence the casting decision. He left that up to Sargent. Nichols was on a tour of European nightclubs when she received an urgent message from her agent saying to return home immediately, that an audition had been arranged and she was being considered for a series that would commence production in 1 week. Nichols hurriedly flew back to Los Angeles and drove herself to Desilu for an interview with the unnamed producer of something called Star Trek. She didn't discover her former lover was involved until she walked into the production office. Joseph Sargent was there, as were Bob Justman, Joe DaGosta, and Eddie Millikis. And then she saw Roddenberry. Nichols remembers saying, "Why, Mr. R, what are you doing here?" And Roddenberry answered with a grin, "Oh, I've got a little something to do with this." Pardon me just a moment here. Okay, I needed to take a drink of water. Nichols had three competitors for the role: Mitty Lawrence and Ina Hartman, who were in their early in their TV and film careers and happy to take the consolation prize, appearing in the background as crewwoman or crewwoman number two. The communication officer's name came about when Roddenberry and Sargent noticed a book Nichols was reading while sitting in the waiting room. It was about a real life African woman named Uhuru, translating to freedom. Roddenberry liked the idea, but felt the name would be easier to pronounce if given an A at the end instead of the U, and Uhura was born. It was Roddenberry's third rewrite, dated May 20th, 1966, just 4 days before the start of principal photography, which had the first reference to the character. As for the pivotal role of Junior Navigations Officer Dave Bailey, six young actors were considered. Anthony Call was the winner. He had appeared on an episode of Jeffrey Hunter's series Temple Houston, as well as The Twilight Zone, Lost in Space, and Combat. He was 25. Walter Edmiston, who worked for decades in television and film, providing hundreds of voices for cartoons and TV commercials, was the voice of the childlike Baylock. In Los Angeles, Edmiston had his own self titled Saturday morning kiddie show. Ted Cassidy, Lurch from the Addams Family, provided the voice of Baylock's ominous alter ego. What we saw on camera, that face that not even a mother would love, was designed by Wah Chang. Clint Howard, as Little Baylock, was 7 years old. He already had many TV and film credits, including appearances on The Andy Griffith Show as Opie Taylor's friend Leon. Uh, Ron Howard, or Opie, of course, was Clint's Howard's real life big brother, and as a cast member for one season of the series, the Baileys of Balboa. A starring role in the TV series Gentle Ben, co-starring Dennis Weaver and a bear, was still 2 years away. The bridge stations were manned by many soon to be familiar faces on Star Trek. Let me find a good bridge shot here. Yeah, I guess that'll do. William Blackburn with brown hair and wearing gold. I'm guessing that's him there, probably. Made his first of 59 appearances. He was the lighting stand in for DeForest Kelley. Frank Da Vinci with dark hair and a blue top. That would be him, I guess. Would have his first of 44 appearances. He was the light stand in for Leonard Nimoy. It was decided early on that sprinkling in familiar faces among the crewmen would help to maintain believability, and these three, being needed on set every day anyway for lighting, were the obvious choices. Eddie Paskey, William Shatner's stand in for lighting setups, returned for his second of 59 appearances. He's the one with brown hair and wearing a red uniform top. Paskey recalled, quote, Greg Peters, the series assistant director, called and asked if I wanted to be on the show as Bill's stand in. And I said, yeah, I'd only been in the business for maybe a year, but I had seen some of what stand ins did. And I thought, geez, this would be kind of fun. Plus, it was a steady income, with my wife and I raising two kids at the time. On the very first show we did, which was the Corbomite Maneuver, Greg told me, quote, I want you to get up there in that seat, which was the seat on the bridge that became mine, Scotty's engineering area. They got me a red shirt like the engineering crew wore, which stood out pretty good. And Greg says, that's going to be your spot. So Greg was the instigator of me being in almost every show because I was always sitting there at the console. Okay. We'll go ahead and get into the episode now. All right, let me take another drink here right quick. Oh, okay. I sorry. I muted earlier and forgot to unmute. That's it. Hmm. Okay. Thank you for pointing that out to me. Okay. Where was I? Okay. So, yeah, that's better. Thank you. Okay. So Kirk tells Spock there must be something they can do to resolve this. But they're just in checkmate, as he observes. And Kirk doesn't appreciate this observation, saying, like, is that the best you've got to offer me? And it's an interesting little moment because Spock says he starts to say, I'm sorry. But instead, he stops himself and says, "I regret that I cannot offer a more logical alternative." Then McCoy returns to the bridge to chide Kirk for pushing Bailey too hard. And I've got to admit, I'm thinking, McCoy, is this really the time to hassle Kirk about pushing Bailey too hard? You're all about to die in 4 minutes, right? Maybe it can wait till after you've all been blown up. McCoy says that his records will show that he warned Kirk about pushing Bailey too hard and that he's not bluffing. To which Kirk says, anytime you can bluff me, Doctor. This gives Kirk the idea, turning to Spock and saying, not chess, Mr. Spock, poker. Kirk then tells Baylock that Earth's ships have a substance called Corbomite incorporated into them, which causes a reverse reaction, destroying the attacker. He then tells Baylock that death has little meaning to us. If it has none for you, then attack us now. We grow annoyed at your foolishness. Spock mentions that Baylock reminds him of his father, to which Scotty says, heaven help your mother. And Spock says she considered herself a most fortunate Earthwoman, referring to his mother in the past tense as if she were deceased. Spock mentions that Baylock reminds him of his. Oh, I said that already. Bailey returns to the bridge and assumes his post. And Sulu says they now have 30 seconds left. Time runs out and nothing happens. Then Balak tells them that the destruction of your vessel is delayed until we have proof of your Corbomite device. And then presumably then we'll blow you up. To which Kirk responds, request denied. Then Balak reappears on the screen and says, okay, now you are really pissing me off. Okay, that's not what he really says. He says, we will soon inform you of the disposition of your vessel. A smaller ship then leaves the Fesarius, and Balak informs them that he will conduct them to a planet in the First Federation that will support them, and there the crew will leave the ship and the Enterprise will be destroyed. The Enterprise's engines come on, and Balak says that he's going to tow the Enterprise to a First Federation world where they'll be removed from the Enterprise and the Enterprise destroyed. Then Balak starts towing the Enterprise, telling them, if you attempt to break free or attack my vessel, I will destroy you. After being towed for a while, Kirk reasons that the tractor beam would have to be a big drain on the power of a ship that size, and Spock notes that the power level of the beam has dropped a bit. So they rev up the engines and try to break free. They eventually get out of the tractor beam, but the engines are damaged, and Scotty recommends staying put until they can be repaired. Then Uhura says that Balak's ship is emitting a distress signal, saying that his power is fading. Kirk orders them to approach Balak's ship so that he can beam over, taking McCoy to treat the alien, and he takes Bailey along as well. And Spock's like, I want to go. Can I go? And Kirk's like, no. So they beam over and they find Balak, who, of course, initially they discover a mannequin. but then discover that Baylock is, of course, this childlike alien here. They hear a voice from the real Baylock saying, "I'm Captain Baylock. Welcome aboard." Kirk once answers, and Baylock says, "Yes, I know, 1,000 questions. But first, we drink Tranya." Yeah, Shorty. Then Baylock reveals that he was testing the Enterprise and its crew and would like someone to stay behind on his ship to engage in an exchange of knowledge and cultures. Kirk agrees to this and he suggests Bailey, probably because he just wants Bailey off the Enterprise. At least that's my guess. All right, so I guess I should give a grade, start giving grades for the episodes. I'm going to give the Corbomite Maneuver a solid B plus. I think it's very well paced, considering that most of the episode really just all takes place on the bridge. It's pretty much a bottle episode, and I do think it does a great job of introducing the various Enterprise characters. Yeah, you take him, or I can fit him for a red shirt, right? Yeah, he's kind of like the Barkley of the original Trek, isn't he? Let's see. So, anyway, I think this episode does do a good job of introducing the characters and setting up some initial conflicts between them. As noted, it also introduces some tropes that would recur over the course of the series and the whole franchise. A powerful alien who creates a dilemma for the crew in order to test humanity, to see how they will behave, to determine whether or not humanity is a civilized or a barbaric species. Another trope is Kirk bluffing his way out of a seeming no win scenario. The interaction between the crew all makes sense, and I think it works well. Their personalities are largely established here. As noted in Cushman's book, this is the episode where Spock, as we tend to think of him, is kind of finally established. And I'm going to go back to Cushman's book now and read a little more about the creation of this episode. Okay, so and of course, remember, this was the first regular series episode. So shooting began on Tuesday, May 24th of 1966. DeForest Kelley recalled, Gene Roddenberry came down to the set, called the crew to attention, gathered everybody around, and made a speech on what we were embarking on and the dedication that had gone into the show, and that he wished it to continue with everyone who was involved, himself and everybody from the stars to the man who sweeps the floor. After the pep talk, Kelly said Roddenberry took him aside and asked him that he remove his wedding ring, which belonged to his deceased mother, had belonged to his deceased mother. Roddenberry said, "No jewelry," and I said to him, "No jewelry, then no DeForest." Roddenberry, who was usually not willing to bend, relented on this point. As for the first scene, Kelly said, Gene had this thing all laid out in the medical lab, giving Bill a physical examination. And I said something about, I'm a doctor, not a moon shuttle conductor. And that was the first scene shot in the series. So the whole I'm a doctor, I'm not this or the other, that was there from pretty much right at the beginning. For this, William Shatner agreed to allow his chest to be shaved. Shatner, with a moderate amount of hair on his body, did not fit into Roddenberry's idea that men of the future would have little or no body hair. While Uhura for this episode and the next was clad in gold, Rand, like Scotty, got an upgrade to the more RCA color TV friendly red. Bill Theiss, the costume designer, said the colors were chosen purely for technical reasons. We tried to find three colors for the shirts that would be as different from each other as possible, in black as white as well as in color. I think the uniform's greatest asset is their simplicity. And then the company moved to the spectacular for its time bridge set. George Takei, for his book To the Stars, recalled the following. What commanded all eyes and pulled them like some gravitational force to the blazingly lit center of the set was the single most compelling presence there, the unmistakable star of the production, William Shatner. Everything seemed to revolve around him. The camera crew, the light crew, the sound crew were all converged on him. And Shatner fully occupied the epicenter. He commanded the hub of all activity on the set. He radiated energy and a boundless joy in his position. He shouted his opinions out to the director. He sprang up, demonstrating his ideas. He laughed and joked and bounced his wit off the crew. He beamed out an infectious, expansively joyous life force. Okay, so on day 2 of shooting, Nimoy was not feeling the infectious energy. As he said, he recalls that Joseph Sargent helped him to break through and realize exactly who the character of Spock was. Spock was supposed to stare at the giant alien ship growing on the view screen. His spoken reaction was a single word for the first time: fascinating. Nimoy remembered, I just didn't have a handle on how to say it. I was still somewhat in first officer mode, but it didn't seem appropriate to shout such a word out. Everyone was reacting in character, humanly, of course, but I couldn't figure out how the Vulcan would respond or how the word should come out. Sargent recalls, Leonard came up to me and he was ready to quit. He said, Joe, I can't take this. I'm an actor and I don't know how to play a character that has no emotion. As an actor, he was trained to work for an emotional elements or for emotional elements in his character, and he just felt there wasn't any. Having been trained myself as an actor, I knew exactly what was bothering him. Fortunately, I was able to make a virtue out of something that for him seemed awfully negative, and I convinced him that having so called no emotion was just an external aspect of the character's element. It didn't have anything to do with the richness of his intellectuality. He was merely able to conquer the emotional distortions that can interfere with reasoning. Nimoy remembered, the director gave me a brilliant note which said, be different, be the scientist, be detached. See it as something that's a curiosity rather than a threat. I said, fascinating. Well, a big chunk of the character was born right there. Day 3 of shooting began with a bang on the highway. Production notes reveal that Nichelle Nichols was involved in an auto accident on her way to the studio and had to go to the hospital for stitches in her lip and return to work at 9:50. Okay, so on day 5, the 5th day of production, as work continued on the bridge, 7-year-old Clint Howard was brought in for makeup tests. He remembered they asked me, or actually they asked my dad, if I might be willing to shave my head. And I didn't think that was a good idea at all. I didn't want to go to school bald. I didn't want to be the kid with the shaved head. I didn't want any part of it. Neither did my dad because I was a working actor and that would take me out of the running for parts for a couple of months. So we said no on the shaving. Then they said, okay, can we put a bald cap on him? And I remember vividly going in and sitting in the makeup chair. And the one fellow, the main guy, he fitted me for the bald cap. He was really nice. They were all nice. It took the whole afternoon because they wanted to do a test to make sure they could get a good look. And it looked great. Clint Howard said, I certainly appreciated the whole sort of spaceship fantasy thing of being on the Enterprise. I certainly thought it was cool. I had my dad take some snapshots of me sitting in the captain's chair. Even at that age, I understood, though, I had a job to do. I knew I was playing a 400-year-old little alien who ran this giant spaceship all by himself. And I knew that I was curious and that I had the power over the Enterprise. They called me on the set, and William Shatner seemed very professional. Everybody did. I liked the costume. I was having fun, and the people were all nice. Of course, they never told me right out of the box that they were going to replace my dialogue. And what I remember them telling me is that they were going to run my voice through this new gizmo called a synthesizer. They were going to synthesize my voice and then stretch it and bend it and make it sound like an alien. So Howard had no problem with his voice being replaced. Let me let's see. Let me get yeah, here we go. Let me get to this scene. So he had no problem with his voice being replaced, but it was something else that bothered him. He said, "You know, I did have issues with the Tranya because the prop man, when he wheeled his cart over and we were getting ready to shoot, showed me and my dad what Tranya was, and it was pink grapefruit juice. And I've just never had a taste for pink grapefruit juice. And I asked my dad, can't they put some grape juice or apple juice in the canister? Does it have to be pink grapefruit juice?" And I remember my dad looking at me and he said, "You're going to drink the grapefruit juice and you're going to like it." So as you see in the scene, when I swallow it, I let out this overblown reaction like a little kid drinking liquor because that's what it tasted like to me. Okay, so on day 7, even with all the action taking place on a single stage, Joseph Sargent had fallen behind, delaying the start of the next scheduled production, Mud's Women, by half a day. At 1 p.m., the Corbomite Maneuver wrapped. Robert Justman, keeping production notes, wrote one half day over, shot extra camera, but blew it on unnecessary setups. John D.F. Black recalls, on that night of the first shoot, I was coming from the stage and I saw Shatner sitting on the rear fender of a car across from my office. And we talked a bit. And he said, "What am I going to do, Johnny?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, if this doesn't work, it's just so damn important to us." And I said, "No, no, it's going to work. It's going to be fine." And he said, "I hope so." And he walked away. Okay. Gene Roddenberry said he wanted to premiere the series with this episode, but NBC preferred a Planet show to be the first up. A compromise was made on August 4th, a month and 4 days before the premiere. The Man Trap would go first, followed by the Corbomite Maneuver. But then on August 12th, 3 months after work on the optical effects had begun, and with nothing yet ready, Corbomite was pushed back to the 6th episode. Then on August 23rd, it was pushed back again to the 8th. And October 12th, pushed back again, and it finally did air in November as episode number 10. Uh, each, each episode of Star Trek experienced a long and turbulent journey from inception to story and script development, followed by pre production, production, and post, including film editing, sound editing, insertion of optical effects titles, and finally scoring. After all this, the real battle had to be fought with the broadcast and the immediate response through reviews, letters from the audience, and most importantly, the ratings. So, yeah, this aired on October 10th, 1966, and it came in third, which is not good. It got a 25.9% audience share initially in the first half hour, coming in third behind The Dating Game, which was first, My Three Sons, which was second. And then in the second half hour, it again was third, this time behind Bewitched and the CBS Thursday Night Movie, again getting a 25.9% audience share. The Corbomite Maneuver was a hit with critics and with Star Trek fans. After its encore airing, it received a nomination as the Best Science Fiction Presentation of the Year at the 1967 Hugo Awards, sci fi's version of the Oscars, Emmys, and Peabodys all rolled together. Okay, and they do have one more anecdote here from Clint Howard, which is very interesting. So, Clint Howard recalls, around the time I was 18, I went in for an audition with George Lucas. It may have been Star Wars. And I was nervous because I knew who George was. Ron had worked with him in American Graffiti, and I knew he was a big time director. So I went into his office, and sitting right off of the main desk was Francis Ford Coppola. And I thought, wow, it was pretty impressive with Francis Coppola over there and George Lucas over here looking me right in the eye. And the first thing George says when I entered the room is, Commander Baylock, Corbomite Maneuver. And I was stunned. This was just a dozen years after the series, so there hadn't been any DVDs. There probably hadn't been any videotapes. I mean, George knew that I had played Commander Baylock, and he knew the name of the episode. And that just shows you ultimately what an impact Star Trek had. So, yeah, I mean, I think that is interesting. And I think it's especially interesting when you look at the episode at some of that plot elements, especially considering that a big part of this plot element is a massive spherical object, the size of a small moon, one might say. And another thing you might take in consideration is that a part of this episode is that this large moon like object slaps a tractor beam on a ship, which the ship is not able to break away from. Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, it does make you wonder, doesn't it, Adega? Okay, so I think I've covered it pretty well. So I think I'll probably go ahead and wrap up here. So before I go, I will ask to like this live stream and also to sub to the channel and perhaps check out some of my other videos while you're here on the channel. I did just post my review for Godzilla vs. Kong yesterday. Feel free to check that out. I will probably be back next week to do, actually, let me move that, and I'll probably be back next week to take a look at Mud's Women. And that'll do it. So thanks to those who stopped by during the stream, those who will watch afterward, and I will see you folks next week and have a good evening.